So, boys, back in the ready room, me and Cole talking about sub guns and the elusive MP7.
I mean, starting off with the MP7, looking at the old MP5 that we all kind of had our affairs and love affairs with. 9mm, 45, 30 round mags. It's time to upgrade. Came from, I want to say like a 1980s kind of NATO requirement. Have more capacity and be able to defeat kind of upgrading body armor at that time. And H&K did a good job coming up with the MP7, but a lot of issues with it, but a lot of sex appeal and fun with it as well.
Do you remember the first time you shot an MP5? Do you remember what you were doing? Because it was kind of it was like a legacy thing when we first got in.
Yeah, there were still some in the inventory when we checked into Team 10. The SD ones, which are super cool. God, those things were quiet. I mean, they shot like a little 22.
Yeah, it was hard to aim them. Like, and if you think about passively shooting this thing, personally, I never got to shoot anything cool with it except for a street light. But if you can imagine an 18-year-old idiot with PVS 15, like trying to shoot out a street light with this thing, that's exactly how it was on a turret. And it's not an easy thing to do. And when you talk to the old guys, like the legacy Navy SEALs, like the SF guys, like the 80s and 90s, those dudes would point shoot this thing off center line, and they were nasty accurate. Like if you watch the dudes do like a 6-plate rack, instinctively shooting, it was badass.
I mean, it was great concealing wise. I mean, how small you could get this thing.
I mean, most of the awesome guys ran with them.
In the briefcase, just putting it right in a briefcase. I don't even think they had this kind of attachment back then. I mean, it was all iron sights.
Yeah. No, they didn't have any kind of optic. I mean, a lot of the guys, you look at the old school dudes, like the old school like SAS guys, they hacked off all of this stuff.
Remember those flashlights they would put in right here? Yeah, like the big mag lights?
Yeah, the huge mag. Yeah, they were massive.
It was like a 20-pound gun.
Yeah, way
for
more
9mm.
It's crazy.
But yeah, I mean, it was fun. Saw it in the movies, got to shoot it some. But kind of upgrading to the MP7.
And it was like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was pre-GWAT they started this program. I didn't see one until probably 2008, like actually one in person.
Yeah, I never saw one in person pictures, but in person, like 2008, actually on a deployment, I finally got a chance to run a guys, and I was all over it. Just a sex appeal, but I mean the knockdown power has always kind of been an issue with how fast the round is, how hot, and kind of getting through different stuff. But it has a place and time and purpose.
Yeah, I mean, for like the PSD style stuff, I mean, we were talking about a little while ago. I used to carry this thing as a backup gun when we do like water stuff, like jumps.
Yeah.
We'd hook this thing on a huge ass bag, and that gun would go inside of this thing, waterproof zip up bag, and you would spin it around and jump. So if everything burned in, at least you had that.
And an H-gear setup.
Yeah, you had that in a small Rhodesian that you would jump. So if you had to do some shit, at least you weren't completely without it. Because before, they've had boats go in and everything else. You don't have any kind of weapon system, so that was it.
It's nice too, even the smaller mags sitting flush. You don't have this big mag sticking out.
Yeah, 20s and 40s. But one of the things I didn't like about it, I mean, just being honest, none of the senior guys would let us carry them when we first got there. It didn't have the knockdown power like you're talking about. They've just had a lot of issues with not being able to finish what you started, really. But for me, I didn't like the ergonomics of it. Just trying to set this thing up. Before this thing, we'd have a laser up front, we'd have the light, we'd have a pressure pad, and they cost so much. Like, I remember dudes hacking off these.
Yeah, I hacked mine off. I hacked that off and the safety off, because every time I'd sling it, it would flip this as well. And I hacked the mag release button off too.
Yep. So that's what I was gonna say. I hacked mine off, so it's not ambidextrous. Everybody knows I hate ambidextrous slides, but there's an extension you could put on this thing, because right there, like, it doesn't feel comfortable to be able to cycle it. Like, it's just a little too short, but they gave you like a 1/2-inch extension so you could actually drive it out and hit it. But
I mean, the safety isn't smooth. The trigger isn't great. I mean, we maybe did a handful of immediate action drills, but I mean, the ergonomics of it, the buttstock, I mean, the charging handle.
I used to call it the noisy cricket. I felt like Will Smith. Like, I'd get on this thing, and it's like I couldn't get comfortable in it because I felt like I was going to break it. Like, you couldn't, there was no in between. It was all the way out, or it was nothing. like that in there, like it's too small. It's like, so I know guys would take multiple notches like a Dremel tool and you'd give yourself relief notches so that way I could collapse this thing in. But in the stock configuration, you don't really have a whole lot of optionality.
I would only carry it in urban areas too, just because like the reach.
Yeah.
You don't have much reach with it.
If you can reach them, you can't really do anything
Yeah.
really damaging with it.
I mean, you were bringing it up too. It's like if there's a bunch of heavy blankets hanging up or guys covered up, I mean, you're not piercing that. It's crazy to think.
Yeah, I mean, dude, like we ran into that in Afghanistan. Guys, it's so cold outside, they'd wrap up these wool blankets, pull them on top of there, and how many guys you get done, and they've got multiple rounds that are stuck inside that wool blanket, didn't even penetrate it. But as far as sling selection, do you run anything crazy? Like this is when I got issued.
I actually ran a 2-point just on these 2 notches right here, and that was it. And actually, these 2 bolts right here allows you to connect Picatinny too. So I ran my light on that just because we had no rail space back then.
Yeah.
I mean, I have an old picture of like an EOTech laser, and your rail space is gone.
Yeah, I mean, after a while, we stripped off all the optics, and all we had was a flashlight and a laser. The longest time, I mean, yeah, trying to get a cheap well with that thing with all the gear, it just, I mean, it is a flex item. Like everybody loves having them, but
Yeah,
the
it'll definitely
reality
put a
is,
smile on your face shooting.
yeah, I mean, yeah,
Auto.
super fun to shoot, just not my favorite gun to shoot.
No.
But it is super cool. Doing the PSD stuff or having a truck gun overseas, like some of that stuff, it was great, especially like the low vis environment. We'd pack these things in, you can shove them anywhere. It looks like a big pistol.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it doesn't take a whole hell of a lot to get it in action.
You had the suppressor on there too. I mean, that suppressor back in the day was heavy.
Who made that, B&T?
Yeah.
I remember the suppressor being decent. I don't remember a whole lot of blowback, but I remember not wanting to shoot it because I felt inferior when I shot it. Like my hand placement wasn't right. I was so used to that, the 416 or like just the traditional M4 platform. I felt like that was so much more maneuverable. And then when I got on this, I was like, God, I feel like an idiot.
I know it would have some extraction issues too, especially as a lefty.
Yeah.
And as righties, like depending on where you put your thumb on those safeties, creating malfunctions just because you'd block that. Bad deal in gunfights.
You know what? Until you just said that, I totally forgot about that. I do remember that. They specifically talked about hand placement. And the same thing, if you think most guys, and that was the issue, that's exactly right. Because if guys didn't have those, a lot of dudes would roll around and they'd manipulate the safety on one side and they'd shoot because you only need a couple rounds. And when they would do that, they'd block the ejection port. So yeah, they'd start getting double feeds and everything else. It's like the small stuff you don't ever think about.
Yeah.
Until it happens, you're like, oh shit. And nobody's repping malfunctions because nobody's running it.
No.
Because you get in your hand, you're constantly trying to rack it.
But I still love it.
Yeah, I mean, it is cool, and it's a novelty. Like everybody
Yeah.
shoots it now, everybody loves it. But I mean, for the time, like in 2001 when they dropped that thing, or early 2000s, I mean, you might as well had a ray gun. Like nobody ever seen anything like that.
No.
They pulled down, they're like, oh my god, and everybody wants it. Like, oh, it's so small, it's gonna be the best thing ever.
Even to this day, people when they see it, it's like you showed them some ghost that they've only heard rumors about.
Yeah, but I always like seeing like the big dudes they grab, and it's like, you know what I'm thinking? It feels like a big ass pistol. They just want to pull it out and just RoboCop it.
It's like that old 45 SOCOM. It's probably just as long.
Exactly.
So we're just talking about it. If we could rebuild this, what would we change? I mean, immediately the buttstock.
Yep.
Make it collapsible over here. Some of the safety selector switches, I don't know, based off the engineering, I mean, they're just super wide and always sticking out. So some of those, and then we were just talking about it, it's like cutting this off. I mean, maybe adding some M-lock options, whether you had to make it a little wider or whatever, but definitely cutting this foregrip off. We always talk about that good C-clamp grip, but if we're able to actually have that buttstock that folded in, have that same option, be able to fold out. And I'd change this charging handle. I fucking hate that charging handle. Can you imagine in the middle of the night trying to find that thing?
That would be one of my that'd probably be one of the first things. Trying to do an immediate action drill and trying to hit this thing, especially with gloves on or when it's cold. Like you remember some of the big ass gloves you wore in Afghanistan, brother,
Yeah.
You're not finding that.
No.
Like you're basically just grabbing a handful and hoping you hit something. I do the same. I'd remove that. I'd remove safety on this side. I'd extend it. And even if I couldn't get this thing in a swing on configuration, I'd do what we did back in the day. I'd take these notches and I'd run them every 2 or 3 inches all the way down, just because you don't know, man. Like you're running a suit you got to do some PSD. You need to be able to collapse this thing and make it form fit for your body. If you're running gear, whatever else, just to have some optionality. But I would definitely run a Hydra on it. I'm not saying that because we made the thing. I'm saying because you don't have any more rail space and it's not going to get any more.
Yeah, I mean, if there was an option to extend that rail a little bit more, I get kind of why they did it with that slanted angle, but if they could extend that some more, and honestly, if they were able to mold in some QD spots.
For me, like if I drop that and I could shrink this down a little bit and get that big over grip, like I like this S&S mount for this light. That way I can access my pressure pad. But to be able to run this configuration, like that feels similar to an M4, to a standard carbine, like a switch shoulders. Everything's where I need it to be. I'm not worried about obscuration or any kind of splashback. And I'm going to be in a heads-up display. I mean, you can just see, like when you drop down on this thing, you can actually see. If we had a drop down to the borderline, it puts me in a defeated posture.
I mean, I remember us running the old school stuff, and it's like you can't get a sight picture with nods, gas mask, any of that.
No.
I mean, it's nice that allows it. But yeah, I mean, talking about the white mount, it's like I think I've had that since like 2010. That was one of SNS's first ones, but
it
still works great today. But these things would always fall out. You'd always have to tighten them.
Yeah, I mean, like, if there's a way to make this platform and do one of those integrally suppressed, that might be a pretty cool option because I don't see the bang in a platform this small with running it unsuppressed.
Right. Like, I would dig that integrally suppressed. Make this whole rail and everything longer. Have that suppressor built in.
Yeah.
But
like if this thing in, was it the Honey Badger from Q had a baby?
Yeah.
Something like that. Slid it all the way in. Be a pretty cool option. That 4.6, the action round, the little hollow point. I mean, if you actually look at the ballistics, like it's not bad. But I mean, you have to have a very specific shot to be able to get that thing down.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of guys weren't doing. They were just grabbing any kind of rounds and throwing them through. And it just...
But when it ran right, I mean, being able to have 50 rounds, you can device 30.
Yeah, some of the extended mags were cool. Yeah, I used to run these 20-round flush mags. Just it took up less room.
Yeah.
And then everything else were 40s and whatever else. But yeah, man.
All right, HK, you heard our feedback.
Yeah. Should make a GBRS variant.
Yeah.
Make a GBRS variant. I know, man. Cool stuff. We need to get out the range and shoot this thing. Cut some notches in the...
Yeah. Bring it to the next meet and greet.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, I hope that was informative. Little trip down memory lane for us. Little history lesson for the guys that maybe have never seen one, never shot one. If you catch us on a range, we'll definitely let you put a couple mags through it.
Thanks.
Cool.